Europe is no longer the powerhouse it once was. With dwindling economies, rising crime rates, an aging population, and an ongoing war, the problems of the old continent just keep on growing. In fact, 2023 saw the collapse of Europe's economy to near zero. Even the economic giants, Germany, France, and the UK, are battling recession fears. And all while Europe's flagship companies like Volkswagen, Unilever, and Vodafone are announcing thousands of layoffs. But it gets worse as growing social division and political polarization are fueling widespread discontent across the continent. These headlines, though, only tell us part of a more worrying story. Welcome to Living History. Europe has come a long way since the idealistic vision of the 1950 Schuman Plan and the 1957 Treaty of Rome, which transformed the continent into the world's second-largest democracy and third-largest economy. Yet Europe's sorry state today is in many ways no surprise. You see, Europe's decline, though gradual, traces its origins back to the post-World War II era, with the onset of decolonization. After all, much of Western European wealth was a result of, let's call it, colonial endeavors. Take that away, and without cheap labor and natural resources to plunder, things begin to look less promising. Add to that socialism, Cold War divisions, and ballooning welfare states, and cracks are bound to start showing up. Today, Europe grapples with economic stagnation, political fragmentation, and a growing sense of an existential crisis, leading many to question whether the European project is nearing its collapse. Yet to fully grasp the depth of Europe's turmoil, we must delve a little deeper into the undercurrents shaping today's crisis. Just consider the Schengen Agreement. Celebrated for its borderless travel within Europe, it now faces unprecedented strains as nations reinstate border controls in response to security threats, massive migrant influxes, and growing mistrust among neighbors. Add to that economic sanctions on Russia and trade wars with external powers including the US and China, and Europe begins to look increasingly isolated with its industries hampered, leading to an increase in unemployment and social unrest. Furthermore, Europe's internal dynamics are exacerbating these pressures. The rise of nationalist and populist parties across the continent, from France's National Rally to Italy's League and Germany's AfD, reflects a growing disillusionment with the EU's ability to solve the very problems it seems to have intensified: immigration, income inequality, cultural clashes, and a faltering economy. These political shifts are not mere reactions, but rather symptoms of deeper societal fractures that question the sustainability of a unified Europe under the current model. Remarkably, at the same time, the US has achieved historically low unemployment rates, rising wages, and an unprecedented surge in business startups. These successes echo many of the principles of Europe's welfare state, but with a critical difference. America has adapted and executed these strategies more effectively than Europe. But how did this happen? Well, let's look at a recent example. When the COVID pandemic struck in March 2020, this led to various countries' governments opening their money taps. As The Atlantic reported, the UK and Germany spent more than $500 billion. France spent $235 billion, Italy $216 billion. But the United States was in a league of its own, spending an astonishing $5 trillion on pandemic relief. That's more, even in today's money, than America spent on the New Deal and World War II combined. And crucially, it's more than double what most European countries spent on pandemic relief relative to the sizes of their respective economies. But could this have backfired for the US? Many expert economists warned that significant spending would send inflation skyrocketing, and initially they seemed right. But in the summer of 2022, something unexpected happened. While inflation in Europe continued to rise, it started to fall in the US. What became clear is that the main driver of inflation wasn't the pandemic stimulus itself, but the massive scale of US consumer spending, which put the country in a much stronger position than its European counterparts. You see, in Europe, rising inflation forced consumers to cut back due to higher interest rates and spiking energy prices, exacerbated by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Meanwhile, Americans with $2.5 trillion in excess savings kept spending, creating a consumer firewall. This allowed the US businesses to raise wages, hire more, and invest, sustaining economic growth. The difference wasn't just in the amount spent, but in how it was spent. Europe paid employers to keep workers on payroll, while the US used expanded unemployment insurance, paying workers to stay home. Initially seen as superior, Europe's strategy faltered as the US economy reopened. Many laid-off Americans used their safety nets to find better jobs or start businesses, leading to a productivity spike in 2023 that Europe could only watch from the sidelines. And then, of course, there is the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which pushed the prices of energy higher in Europe than in the US or any other place. Its full effect wasn't known until 2023, but the major difference between how the US has been able to survive every economic crisis since 2020, while Europe in turn has suffered, boils down to decision-making. Ironically, President Biden has embraced an economic agenda that closely mirrors social democratic traditions of Europe, all while Europe has been squabbling over how to move forward in unison. Just consider this. Since 2019, the US has added more than $10 trillion to its national debt. In 2023 alone, the US government spent $1.7 trillion more than it made. That kind of spending is basically unthinkable for the European Union. In fact, after the 2008 financial crash, Europe experienced a series of debt crises to the extent that they almost tore apart the continent's economic union. This left many European leaders petrified of deficit spending, a stance that is looking increasingly fatal for the continent. But what does this mean in practice? Well, over the past years, many European countries have sliced budgets just as their economies cry out for more spending. These decisions have angered citizens of these countries, stirred up anti-government protests, and ignited the rise of far-right and populist parties. In certain instances, the situation borders on the absurd. In Germany, an effort by the government to launch an affordable clean energy investment agenda was met with a blockade by the courts in November 2023. The overturn was made by the court because the government was attempting to use the pandemic emergency funds as a way to get around the country's debt limit, a debt limit the government had imposed on itself in the first place. Talk about shooting an own goal. So what now for Europe? It is an open secret that each country in Europe defends its own interests. Some of the major problems facing the European Union are that it is not a state, but rather a trade bloc that at times tries to act like a federation. This brings about the difficulty of managing the various economies within a monetary union, whereby the European Central Bank plays an important role in balancing the different economies. But the truth is that the European single market is not integrated in the same way as, let's say, the American market. The lack of strength in crucial sectors like information and communication technologies explains this even further. It's not surprising that, of the 10 most valuable technological companies in the world, ASML is the only European company. Even Germany, the engine of Europe, is facing another recession and is finding it extremely hard to find markets to take up its production. Aside from the high cost of energy that weighs on its industry, there is also the push caused by the United States and China moving towards more protectionist and interventionist policies, such as the Inflation Reduction Act passed by the Biden administration. With this in mind, the 1990s level of integration simply won't cut it in today's crisis. To stay relevant, the EU needs a unified voice to manage key economic sectors and unlock private funding. This is essential to supercharge investments in energy, infrastructure, innovation, and security. The time for half measures is over. Europe must unite or risk being left even further behind. However, there is also an alternative: the breakup of the European Union. Here, though, history serves as a cautionary tale. A potential breakup of the EU could lead to a return to an era of smaller alliances, reminiscent of the tumultuous period of the 19th and early 20th century, which contributed to the outbreak of 2 world wars. The lack of economic and political unity back then fostered competition, distrust, and conflict among nations, resulting in widespread instability and immense human and economic costs. Reverting to a fractured state risks reigniting these dangers. Economic disparity, political tension, and reduced global influence would undermine decades of progress in peace and cooperation. But what do you think? Let us know in the comments below.